Welcome back to the Grant Writing Experts podcast. Today we're joined by Kelsey Barrera, a nonprofit strategist and consultant who leads Canopy Nonprofit Consulting. Kelsey has worked across the nonprofit sector for over a decade and now serves as a fractional grants department for organizations of all sizes. In this episode, Kelsey shares her unique peer prospecting approach, a powerful but often underutilized way of finding funders by looking at who supports your peer organizations. She walks us through her step-by-step process, explains how she blends with tools like Instrumentl, and gives listeners a practical template they can start using right away. We also dive into two other challenges Kelsey sees often in her consulting work: how a lack of strategic planning or a clear theory of change can derail even the best written proposals, and why engaging your board members can dramatically improve your odds of grant success. If you've ever felt overwhelmed by endless prospect lists or struggled to focus your grant strategy, this episode will give you a sharper, more efficient way forward. Let's get into it. Kelsey, well, thank you for taking the time today. I'm excited for the interview. To kick things off, I would love to learn a little bit more about you. Can you start by telling us about yourself, the work you do, and how you got into the grant profession?
Yeah, so I consider myself a nonprofit strategist and consultant, though I do a fair bit of grant writing as well. I lead a small firm called Canopy Nonprofit Consulting. We work with nonprofit clients across a variety of sectors, but really kind of what's the common thread is we integrate deeply with the team to serve as like a fractional grants department. And so we go through the full process with clients, from grant readiness and building a grant calendar all the way through cultivation, writing, and then helping them steward grants that they've won. I'm based in Texas and mom to a 3-year-old and two 90-pound mutts who also think they're people. I've been in the nonprofit sector for the past decade. I've worked in a lot of different roles across fundraising, from events and stewardship to individual giving and databases. But about 6 years ago, I came across an opportunity for an in-kind marketing grant for some support that my organization needed. And I applied because it was low stakes. Nobody really cared if I went for it. But so the organization wasn't ultimately awarded, but they were selected as a finalist. And that set off this whole set of like internal discussion and momentum that had been needed for a while. And so understanding how powerful even just the process of going through a grant process could be really kind of gave me the bug. So that led me to my first full-time role in grants. After about 4 years with a 1-year-old, I realized that I really needed to redesign the way that I worked so that I could show up fully as both a parent and as someone committed to the nonprofit sector. And that's what was the catalyst to go into consulting.
That's quite the journey. Do you have a like a grant project or client success story that you're especially proud of? Was it like that very first in-kind grant that you almost won?
That one was pretty great. Yeah, being selected as a finalist out of a ton of organizations. Another one is I wrote a successful MIT Solve proposal that was led to this whole pilot project where we got to pilot a manufacturing training. That one was pretty cool too. No, I'm proud of all of my clients that have taken real steps to put things like data collection in place that weren't there before. I think that those are my biggest wins, are the ones that are really kind of behind the scenes structural stuff that I know is setting them up for long-term success.
And I think we're going to dig into some of the back process stuff that has a real impact on everything that happens on the bottom line. But a lot of people start their prospect research inside a grant database, but you start somewhere different. Can you share more about your peer prospecting method and where, if at all, does a tool like Instrumentl come into that process?
Yeah. So when I started my first job in grants, we didn't have any of these paid databases. So looking at who funded peers was kind of the default old school way that we had access to. And then we did get Instrumentl a couple of years in, but I was still finding that the best prospects were the ones that were funding our peers. I learned that the best indication of what a funder will give to is what they've already given to in the past. And seeing them show up across several of your peers is like a big green flag waving, saying we care about this type of work. And so something that I've learned since becoming a consultant with really constrained time and needing to have clear, focused work is the importance of focusing deeply on the funders that are most aligned and not getting kind of pulled into the trap of looking at everything that looks like it could be a match. So starting with those kind of core funders that fund several of the peer organizations, I think is a good lens to start building your shortlist and building your foundation that you can then fill in around the sides of from the Instrumentl matches.
Interesting. So you were saying that peer prospecting was like the old school way to do it before databases were a thing?
That's how I learned. That's when, even before I was leading grant work, I was in organizations that were majority grant funded, and the folks on my team that were doing grant work, that's how they figured out who to go after, was looking at who funded peers.
That's interesting. So it's almost like doing peer prospecting, the method that you're talking about, doesn't seem like it's the most common starting point for folks these days. The most common starting point seems to be opening up one or all of the grant databases and starting your search there and understanding how keywords work and all that jazz. But you're still sticking to the old school way of doing it, at least at the start.
I think we blended it nicely. Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Do you think this is this common for other folks, or do you see yourself as uniquely doing this, staying in the old school way and only bringing in the database later?
I don't have nearly as many conversations with other grant writers as I should. I haven't heard of other folks doing this lately, especially folks that are new to the field.
Hmm.
But I'm sure there are plenty of people who also take this approach.
Well, hopefully we change that with this conversation. There's a lot of people that will be reaching out to you to talk more about this.
Yeah.
So it sounds like peer prospecting often uncovers funders that you wouldn't find through other methods. Do you have an example that you can share of when peer prospecting led to a great match?
Yeah, I don't want to be too specific, but
Of course.
yeah. So, I mean, there are cases like I'm working with a client in the DC area where the funding landscape is not known for being particularly transparent. Many of the best fit funders for them are invite only, they don't have a website, and so they probably are showing up in that list of funder matches that Instrumentl returns. But it's a list of like 500, 600 plus that screening through would have taken a lot of hours, and we still might have missed some. But by looking at the peers, we were able to find 4 or 5 kind of under the radar funders that have consistently funded their peers and add them to our strategy. And then, we hop back into Instrumentl to go through that giving data. That is my favorite part of Instrumentl. It's the best place that I've found to go and actually digest the data that's in the 990 in a way that makes sense to then, vet them out further, and then also to track them. Once we have decided they're a good fit, they go onto the pipeline in Instrumentl and we track them that way.
Got it. Okay. It sounds like there's a whole process, associated with this. Can we go back to the beginning and just
Yeah.
go through, like, if someone is just starting out, say they're a new organization that doesn't have a huge peer network or a history to start from, so they feel like they're starting from zero. Can we go through step by step of what your peer prospecting approach looks like? I would love to go
Yeah.
from 0 to 10 and pull it all out.
Totally. So I think this works just as well for new organizations as for established ones. Really, you're kind of thinking about, where does our Venn diagram of impact overlap with the Venn diagrams of impact of other organizations? So the type of work is kind of one bucket that we're looking at, and the geography is another important bucket. So we start by trying to find 5 to 7 organizations that could be considered peers, and the definition can vary a little bit depending on the organization. But typically this is an organization doing similar work to you in a similar geography. And if you're really niche or hyper local, where there aren't a lot of, exact matches, you can get a little creative. But for example, if you're an affordable housing developer working in the Pacific Northwest, you might want to look up other organizations working in affordable housing, even if it's not, developing housing units, but maybe it's helping first-time home buyers from low-income backgrounds access the financing they need, or things that are related and kind of overlapping. Or if you're hyper-local, you might take the type of work broader, but look, hyper-locally, who's funding the food pantry down the road if you're in housing. Those are some examples. So we just do a Google search, really, and it's not a perfect process. It doesn't have to uncover, every single organization doing work like yours. We're just trying to get a good sampling of the ones that are the most visible out there, and the ones that come up in the Google search are probably the ones that the funders are seeing first as well. So then we spend some time going through their website, understanding and documenting the ways that the peers work is similar and different from yours. And then we look at their list of funders. So you can often find that on their website or in the annual report. And then you can also find it by looking them up in Instrumentl and looking at their list of past grants received. So we typically will look at both of those places and compare. Sometimes, especially corporate funders, don't show up in Instrumentl the way they might in like an annual report. And so that's a nice piece to uncover as well. So we'll just like do screen grabs or copy and paste and dump that all into a table format. And then we zoom out so that we can look at the themes and the trends that are coming up. That's really where the value comes from. So one piece of this is we're looking at how an organization stands out among their peers and how they contribute to that kind of overall ecosystem of impact being created. And being able to articulate this to a funder in a grant proposal can be really powerful. So that's one piece of it. And then I've also heard from clients that when they're looking through this list, they find at least one organization that they think could be a good partner and want to reach out and start that process. And then we get to the funder lists. And so I typically will like physically highlight the funder names that are coming up repeatedly across the list of peers. And those are really the ones that we want to focus on first. Again, this is about like seeing the patterns that are coming up. So those ones that are repeated kind of down the document are the ones that we focus on. And we look them up in Instrumentl, look at their giving data. And if at that point they look like a good fit, then they get added to the pipeline.
Okay. So let me back up here. So it sounds like you look at everybody's, you find your peer organizations through a Google search and through some of the creative ways if necessary. You put them in a table. And then you find all of their previous funders, and you put them in a different table, and then
it just goes in a column.
Just in a column, and then you go through that column of all the funders for all of these organizations, and then you figure out which names keep coming up again and again, and then that turns into your short list of those funders that you should go after?
Yeah.
Okay, this is great. Do you have a template for this? Because people are going to want something like this. Is this the template you were talking about?
Yeah, totally. This is it. Yeah, it's very simple, but it's just a column for the organization name and what they do, ways that it's similar and different, and then that funder list so that you can just kind of unfocus your eyes and skim down it, and the ones that are the same will ping. Yeah.
Okay, so you build your shortlist based on which ones show up repeatedly. Are there other things that you look at to build that shortlist, or is it just on frequency and then you move into digging into those funders deeper?
Yeah, so that's the starting point. And then, there are things like, especially around geography, places that you have to be a little bit more diligent where, if some of your peers are serving a different geographic region, you want to make sure that, the funders that are on that list aren't there because they care about the geography. They're there because they care about the content of the work and the mission. So there are some nuances there. We want to look at, of course, are they open to potential new grants? All of those things. Look at their giving data. Are they frequently giving to new grantees, or are they pretty much giving to the same organizations every year? Kind of all of the things that I think Instrumentl talks about regularly as you're vetting those opportunities out. It just kind of, you start with those ones and go through the process with those first and get them, the ones that are a good fit, locked in on the calendar. So that way, as you're thinking about organizational capacity throughout the year and where you really need to spend time on what's important, not urgent, you've got spaces. And then you can fill those in with the best matches from what's returned through the Instrumentl search.
Okay, I do want to ask for the Instrumentl search, but I don't know if I'm there yet. When you get to your short list based on frequency and you start to go deeper and you're researching those funders, do the funders that you're looking at in the short list, do they have to have active grants already posted? Can they be just funders without anything? What does the approach look like for those? Do you label them differently or think about them in a different way?
Yeah, I would say the ones that have active grants posted are the most straightforward. Like, obviously there's a way to approach them, especially right now. Funders, I think, are overwhelmed, and so I'm seeing less openness to cold outreach.
Interesting.
So if they are invite only, or if they don't have a website, like, we would still add them to the list if they are frequently giving to new grantees. If it's a case where they've got their same set of grantees every year pretty much, then typically we'll leave them off of the list. But if there looks like there's good openness there, then we'll add them to the list and just really make sure we've got time to figure out how we approach them. So if that's one benefit of seeing which peers they fund is you could potentially reach out to your peer and ask for an introduction, ask if they would want to partner the next time they apply, ask for insights. You obviously have to do that delicately because we don't want to introduce competition into the mix, but approaching it from a collaborative spirit, I think typically plays well. And is a great way to get in. You can then take that shortlist to your board, and that's where it helps to have that really tight short list of top funders that you need an in with to give them so they can see if there's anyone in their network. Yeah, that's kind of how we approach it.
This sounds like a really effective playbook. Do you have do you do these in stages? Do you rank one as step one, you got to reach out to the peer organization and see if you can find a collaborative way to get a warm introduction and then go to your board? Or is it kind of we're doing all this for all these funders on the short list?
Yeah, I mean, it would be smart to have an order, I think, but I don't typically. It's more of an intuitive, who's, I think, it's important to know, okay, which peers do we actually have that kind of relationship with? And if that's there, then maybe that's our first step. Otherwise, maybe we start with the board. So it's kind of, I bring the list of the client first to whoever I'm working with, the director of development, executive director, whoever, and we kind of talk through all of these things and figure out one by one what's the best approach.
So the person that builds a short list doesn't do it in isolation. This is a living list, you could say, that they're going to bring up to their leadership. And this is like a conversation starter internally to figure out who to go after.
Totally. And especially with invite only or more off the radar funders, we may not actually pursue all of them, but it's good to have that short list and we see, which ones of them we could get an in with, and the rest maybe go on a wish list for later years to build toward, or to watch for their names to pop up on industry mixer lists or whatever, bump into somebody at an event. So it's good to have them on your radar, even if you don't have an immediate way of getting in touch.
Got it. And how big, I think you might have mentioned this, but how big do you want your short list to be when you are going internally to start these conversations?
Yeah. So, I mean, usually when we narrow it down to the ones that don't have active grant opportunities, that really we need active collaboration to figure out the strategy for, it's I don't know, 5 up to 10 maybe would be the max. I think beyond that, we risk getting into overwhelm.
So there's tactics to doing this. You can't just you can't take a massive list and take a slightly less massive list.
Yeah.
And then send it up the chain to see what gets green lights and what gets a red light.
That's really what this is all about, is focus and using our energy as wisely as possible.
So it's like an antidote to the spray and pray approach?
Yeah, exactly.
Got it. Okay, this is great. Let's transition to the proposal writing process. When you get it narrowed down to that short list and you've got your green lights on the ones you want to go after, what do we do at that point? You have the funder and you want to start going after them. You mentioned some of the approaches that you take. What's your playbook for when you have your 4 of the 7 that you want to go after? What happens at that stage?
Yeah, then we get into the relationship stage. And I think right now relationships are more important than ever with how competitive the grant process is looking. So if they've got kind of an open process, we want to obviously make sure we're respectful of the funders' priorities. And if they are not open to conversation, but they'd rather you just apply, then, we start there. But if they're open to conversation, we always reach out. Sometimes that's cold, sometimes that's through a warm introduction if we can find one. Try to have a conversation, or at least kind of let them know, hey, we intend to apply and we're excited to get to hopefully work with you. And then, we see kind of what bubbles up through that process. There are usually a few that fall out at that stage because the funder either isn't responsive and it's an invite-only opportunity, or we have had a conversation and it turns out it's not the right time, or it's not actually as good a fit as we thought. So then the list shrinks even further, which is great because then we can really spend the time that we need to put together strong proposals for the ones that are still in the mix.
Got it. Do you ever go how many times do you do this peer prospecting process? Does it ever get restarted if the list gets too small, or is it the goal is to keep a small list, as you said?
Yeah, I mean, so this isn't the only way we build our pipeline, right? We start here, and that's kind of our anchor opportunities. And then we also review the matches in Instrumentl, and we'll fill in around that Typically, I like a pipeline of 4 to 5 times in like dollar value compared to the goal that they're trying to achieve. And so we'll build out that list and that pipeline for a period of 12 to 18 months typically. And then usually about mid-year, about 6 months in, I would say we do kind of a refresh. So sometimes that comes back to the peer list. More often than not, it's just going back to the Instrumentl matches and filling in some of those more like low-hanging fruit opportunities that do have open processes and, do align on all of the criteria.
Got it. So that you have like a multi-pronged approach of finding grants now. You still have the old school peer prospecting way, because that's like one of the best ways to get started on it. And also tell me if I'm putting words in your mouth here. And then at the same time, you also have the grant database side of things, like the newer way to do it, I guess, that everyone's doing is you're searching for grants, you're compiling a list through a database format, and then you're doing the peer prospecting side, and then that comes together into your prospect list of who you're going to go after.
Exactly. Yeah. And so sometimes that means we don't review maybe all of the matches that would take, 10, 20 hours because we've got a good set through the peers as like our starting point. And that's why often like at that mid-year point, if we do need a refresh, there are usually still some fresh options in the mix that we haven't looked at before. Yeah. I think it's really easy to get caught up in feeling like you need to know all of the options that are out there and have looked at everything. But the reality is that, especially in the nonprofit sector, our time and capacity is limited. Our funds are limited, and we just have to find a good set and go with that to start. I've been very inspired by Mallory Erickson's 5 and dive approach, which is more used, I think, in individual giving. But this idea that like, if you find a good opportunity, start pursuing it, but like you don't have to go through every single thing that's out there before you start working on it.
Interesting. Okay, this is great. I think this is probably shedding light on your unique approach versus what a lot of folks have, because the fear of missing out is really strong. And some people feel that they have to turn over every single stone to make sure that something wasn't missed, because God forbid a board member or somebody forwards an email about a new opportunity that fell under the radar of the person whose job it is to, quote unquote, find these opportunities. You've worked with a lot of clients to write grant proposals. And you mentioned before this call that you've noticed a common stumbling block, and that's a lack of a strategic plan or a theory of change. Can we unpack what happens when these are missing and how it impacts all the process that you're talking about?
Yeah. I mean, I think the biggest, maybe not the biggest symptom, but one of the big symptoms of not having clarity on strategic plan in particular is that you end up with a universe of rocks to turn over that is just physically bigger than any human could possibly get to.
Good metaphor.
And so then you do miss things because you're trying to look at everything, and so you're missing what's actually important. And so when an organization is able to narrow their focus, build a strategic plan that has, 3 or 4 key initiatives that they're really focused on, that they really want to focus on growing, then we can narrow the search a lot more. And I think we do a better job of actually catching the ones that are important and really well aligned.
So when you're working with your clients, is there a process that you follow to help them clarify their theory of change? Do they have to have a certain level of clarity on that before you start working with them? Or if they're very confused, what does the process look like?
Yeah, I mean, I have some templates, some questions. I can help them. I can make suggestions. Ultimately, most folks who are hiring me for the grant process. And so there's limited capacity, I think, within that scope of work to really influence these decisions that need to happen at the top levels with the board and the executive staff in most cases. So yeah, I try to give resources. I try to make really clear why it matters to funders, how important it is for a funder to be able to see that coherent story and how this particular project aligns with a bigger vision for the world. Ultimately, like, it's really up to the organization. I would love to do more work where I'm stepping more directly into that space, but that's not what typically I've been hired for so far.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, even from having previous conversations, it sounds like grant writing or grant prospecting or grant work in general is relegated to a certain silo of the organizations. And for it to be really successful, there it seems like grant professionals are vying to get a seat at the table with leadership, which leads to the other thing that we were talking about before this call, is that boards can be a really powerful ally in fundraising, but we're often and they're often not left out of that process. Can you explain why boards should be getting more involved in the grant seeking process, and how does a grant professional do that if they're working in house?
Yeah. So, I mean, there are a few reasons that's really important. I mean, at the very top level, as we've talked about, have the ultimate say in the organization's vision and direction and that top level strategy. And so having them get more into the weeds of seeing why it's challenging when they haven't landed the plane on that top level strategy can be a really helpful motivator and help them have context for why that's so important. But then the other piece is really about relationships, I think. As I've mentioned, we're in a really competitive grant landscape right now. I'm sure you've heard that from lots of people. And so really being able to have conversations that matter with funders is the best way to increase your odds of success. And often, not always, but often board members have a set of relationships that the staff may not have access to with funders or with peer organizations who could make the introductions at funders. And so I think one of my favorite ways to get boards involved is just to give them that short list of these are our, top funders. I think that's something that any in-house grant writer should be able to kind of send up the chain, is a list of 5 to 7, maybe up to 10 funders that you're really trying to get in the door with. Give that to your board and ask if anybody is able to make an introduction for us. I think often I've heard that boards want to get more involved, but they don't know how. Or on the other side of the coin, we're throwing so much at them that they're just overwhelmed and not sure where to plug in. If we're sending them a list of, 100 prospects that we're going after, they might say, oh yeah, that's impressive, but they're not going to volunteer to make an introduction necessarily if they don't know out of that huge list, who do we really need to be focused on? So, yeah.
Is there a specific example that comes to mind for you in terms of when you got a board's involvement that made a difference? I'd love to pull out the tangible tactics applied in a real life story.
Yeah. I have one client that has a very well-connected board member, and he was able to not only make an introduction, but actually join the conversation with a really big funder in the space. It didn't end up being the right time, but I think just hearing the notes from that conversation, I think it was a different conversation than a funder might have with just a staff person, because the board member was able to kind of brag on the organization in a way that I think a staff member might feel uncomfortable doing. They're sitting just enough outside that I think it just added a really helpful dynamic to the meeting.
Okay, that's great. Well, Kelsey, I want to be respectful of your time here because I know we're getting
Sorry, we're already over. I'm just
I know.
talking.
Well, yeah, well, we can just keep going. There's always so much to talk about. But to bring it on home and land the plane, I'd love to give people a tactical takeaway to get started. So if you were to say, if you were to narrow this down to 3 steps that a grant professional can start doing today to start applying some of the things you were saying about peer prospecting, involving the board more, solving some of these strategic challenges, what would be, I know it'll be hard to sum it up in 3 steps, but where would you tell people to begin?
Okay, so I would say 1, do a Google search and see who's doing similar work to you in a similar geography. 2, find their list of funders, whether that's on their website or in Instrumentl. And 3, start looking at the patterns that you see come up.
Right on. That was a good place to get started.
Yeah.
And do you have a rule of thumb for knowing when a funder is a good fit or not?
Yeah, I would say the simplest way is, have they funded 2 or more projects that are like ours in our geography?
That is also a good tip. These are very tactical, so this is great. And then lastly, what is one myth about prospect research or proposal writing that you'd like to debunk if you were given a mic to talk to everybody everywhere at one time?
Yeah, I would love to debunk this idea that more is better. It's really about focus and quality and figuring out where your time is of the highest value. We're all so busy, and so yeah, we want to turn over enough rocks, but we don't necessarily have to turn all of the rocks over at once.
Yeah, I think that's your contrarian, unique approach of how you go about that. I don't know if everybody feels that way.
Yeah. And if you don't, you don't. If that's like just a personal itch to scratch, or if that's the way things need to work for you, it's still better to start with the focused, and then you can keep going out in kind of these concentric circles is how I like to think about it. And you can decide when you've gone far enough out.
This is great. Kelsey, we can end it there. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah. Thank you.
Where can people go to learn more about you, your work, and possibly connect?
CanopyNPC.com is my website. And yeah, that's pretty much the only place that I show up right now. I'm not huge into social media at the moment.
Good. One thing for you to remember.
Priorities.
Go to the website, we prioritize Canopy through that.